I don't think we often talk about failure, but I think you're taking it to another level here in that we're talking about how we emotionally handle that failure or how we as people handle that failure. Not as a business, not how we handled our business failure from a business perspective, but from a human perspective. And I think that's going to be very interesting.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'll tell you what, you're right, Colin. We're going to be tackling this. How do you handle things emotionally? How do you deal with family and loved ones as you pursue your business vision? All those sort of things. Because you know what? We're not just robots as entrepreneurs, we're people. And yes, we have great dreams and we're pursuing those dreams and things like that, but we also have feelings. We also have other aspects to our life. And so, how do you handle that? And today we're looking at an incredible topic, and it's dealing with failure. How do entrepreneurs deal with failure? Because let me tell you, all entrepreneurs experience failure from time to time. Yeah, every single entrepreneur. And if you're a serial entrepreneur, you will experience failure. And the question is, how do you handle it? Do you go along handle it by looking for alcohol or other substances and say, drown your sorrows as such? Or do you take a fight or flight mentality? Or do you take it out on your family? Do you kick the dog or the cat when you come home from the office? What is it? What are the things that you do to handle that? And I've been through a very large business collapse. I remember about 25 years ago, or nearly 25 years ago, and I went from hero to zero literally one day to the next. I was worth millions and millions, and I woke up the next day to discover I was worth negative. And to cut a long story short of what actually happened with all of that, and by the way, it was actually not my fault. I had no control over it. My company got caught up in a global merger between massive corporations. So the question I began to think about as I considered this topic was, what did I do? And I did some right things and I did some wrong things and on that journey. And the right things I did was just put my head down and work the problem. And that was really hard. I remember going up in the elevator to my offices and I used to put my head down and I would say almost like a mantra, into the breach I now come. And that's the guns breach. And because I'd step out of the elevator and be like, you're just thrust into chaos, instantly into chaos in situations like that. And it was really difficult. I would there in the office, I'd be leaving home about 5 a.m. and I'd get home about 9 p.m. And I didn't see the family. I did that for probably four months before we had to make the decision to finally close the business. And it was a really difficult time. And sure, I just worked the problem and everything like that. And one of the things you got to make sure you do everything right legally in those circumstances, that's for sure. But I did some mistakes as well. I found myself getting more and more isolated from loved ones, isolated from friends, and so forth. And I remember my wife told me, my wife is absolutely amazing. She really helped me through this time. And it's really important to have people like that who can help you through this time. My son used to go along and set the table for dinner each night. He used to set the table for dinner each night. And then my wife told me, as he would ask, is Dad coming home? And she'd say no. And then she told me one time, she said, he stopped asking. And the emotional impact of that was like a sledgehammer. It was one of the most difficult things I've ever had to deal with in my life. I suddenly realized that my son had stopped asking if I'm coming home for dinner. And you may say, what's the big deal and all that sort of stuff and everything. But for me, it was a catalyzing moment where I realized I had to not just try to limp the business along and try to solve it and put things back together, everything. It was that point in time I said, it needs to finish. It was the emotional stress and where I was having to fire great friends had to cut expense lines, all that sort of stuff, and deal with all sorts of circumstances. But it was that question no longer being asked. And it can take you off guard sometimes. And you think, yeah, I can handle this. I can move forward. I can get things happening. I can piece together the bits and pieces back together of whatever the venture is in the process of collapsing. Then something right at the sort of left field comes and just slams you. And that's what happened to me. And in the end, I said, that's it. I'm making some dramatic decisions, and we closed everything. Yeah, and it was a really challenging time, but we bear the scars in a different sort of way. When we hear of other people going through difficult times, we feel it emotionally for them. And my immediate reaction is, what can I do to help? What can I do to help you as a person? And I know the other moderators here on the platform have been through similar sorts of things, and I'm sure they'll share some stories as well. Colin, you have any thoughts on that?
That's just interesting because you had me thinking there about my failures. And when we begin to reflect back on those times, we begin to think about how do we handle ourselves. And it was all about, at that point, we were very depressed, we were angry, we were this, we were that. But we really didn't think, at the time, we didn't think about the people around us and how we behaved or acted or dealt with it with our spouse or our kids or those around us. And they were affected by those failures too. Yet we always say it's our failures. It is our failure. We're the ones responsible for it. But everybody around us was affected by that. You know,
I actually,
Michael,
Colin, can
yeah,
I
go ahead.
interrupt for a second, Colin? I actually think it's almost worse for them because at least we're in a position to hopefully be able to make some decisions. They're not even in that position. They're just receiving they're in the boat with you, and they don't even have an oar.
Right.
All they could do is put their arms around the captain of the boat who's steering it, powering it, whatever. That's it. But they actually do not have any control over the situation other than to express love. And what do they get back 9 times out of 10 from us? Circumstances, they get vitriol back. Why? We're just letting our emotions out or something, our frustrations, our anger, as you said, whatever it is, and they're giving back love, and we can even see it due to the circumstances we're in. And it's our loved ones which actually, in many respects, bear a lot of the cost. And it's a challenge. Sorry, Colin, keep going.
No, I think that's what it is, Michael. And then you talk about scars. I think the startup failures are the scars of our past that we use to guide our future endeavors. So it's those failures that allow us to thrive when we launch those new startups. And I'm not talking about startup failures, I'm talking about any failure in our life. I'm talking about going back even to our childhood. We've all failed and we've all had those scars. And if we can use those moments in time and those lessons, to learn those lessons to improve our chances of success at the next venture, that's the key. And I think actually, if we can share those scars, like you described them as scars, that's why I'm using that, Michael. But if we can share them as scars and we can talk to others about those things, then hopefully they can learn from those scars as well. So I think there's positive things that can happen from that failure. And that's something that we all need to internalize.
That's so true. I must admit, when I look back at my own experiences during that difficult time in my life, there's a major international investor in my company who just said, "Oh, by the way, that chunk of money is coming. It was supposed to be coming, and we're contractually obligated. No, it's not going to come. And yeah, I know we're legally obligated, but yeah, we're just not going to pay it anyway. And we got like $300 million allocated to the legal fees. Go for it. Yeah, it's just I was summarizing a very long, extensive thing. It was really quite difficult. But there's a whole lot of small investors that got caught in this as well. And after I made the decision to close the company and all that sort of stuff. I knew the small investors obviously lost their shirt, they lost everything. And it was about a couple of years later, I was doing another interesting startup, which is, and you're right, you become a lot wiser along the journey. And I actually spoke with a number of the small investors. And they went along and they invested some money into this thing I was doing at the time. And when they said they were going to do that, I must admit I broke down. I bawled my eyes out. And the reason why is because it's almost like you don't know really how much or what a person thinks of you until they go along and say they invest again in this case. And they said to me, Michael, it's okay. You're thrust into a circumstance you had no control over, and you did everything you possibly could do to do what was right. Therefore, we're happy to stump up some more cash. And that's the other thing that really floored me. And boy, did I make sure they made a lot of money on that investment. I really did. And they did. They made a
But
packet
it's
of money.
interesting you're saying that the failure, like for me, when I failed, and I failed in a very dramatic way in 2000. Our company, I had sold the company, so I was no longer in control, but our company went to over $1 billion in market valuation, and then $15 a share, and then collapsed to 6 cents a share after the dot-com crash. And everyone who was involved in it, all the employees, everyone lost everything. And it was very hard to take. It was, I can't tell you. But I'll tell you this, the shareholders that invested in me, I failed them, and I felt that. I worry more about losing money for shareholders or for employees than I do with my own money. Like, I can handle it. If I go in the stock market, I make an investment, it's bad, I lose money, move on. Whatever, it happened. But when you lose money for your team, the team that spent 10 years building this company, and you screw it up on exit, or you lose, my mother was one of the shareholders, you're losing your mother's money. And it hurts. It hurts. It really hurts. And that nothing, yeah, it's just, I can't say how bad that is, but yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, and by the way, Colin, just to let you know, we're getting some feedback on your audio for some reason, so I'm not sure the reason why. But despite that, I'll tell you, I could hear almost the pain in your voice as you're remembering back to those times. But you're listening to The Complete Entrepreneur, and we're tackling a topic which is a, a challenging one for most entrepreneurs. If you go to other sessions in Clubhouse and they'll be talking about, yes, you can do it, yes, you're going to be a success, and you're always going to be a success. But we're tackling the topic of dealing with failure. And the reason why is because in The Complete Entrepreneur, we look at the life of an entrepreneur. And whether we like it or not, if you do enough entrepreneurial activities, eventually you are going to fail at some point in time. And the impact that has upon you and your life can actually be quite dramatic. That being said, I would love to hear from King. You've had your hand up. You're on the stage, and by the way, we would love to invite other people to put their hand up so we can have them up on the stage to hear your story. What was it like for you to deal with failure? So, King, welcome to The Complete Entrepreneur.
Thank you, Michael. The topic of failure and entrepreneurship, I think, go hand in hand because I look at entrepreneurship as taking, generally speaking, a calculated risk. And as all know, with risk comes opportunity for success, but then there's also the counterbalance of failure. And when I think about failure, I could tell countless stories of such. I'll just tell two. One is with a gentleman that I know who I won't give too much information away out of respect to his privacy, but he is a very senior level executive, let me put it that way, at a multi-billion dollar law firm, part of a 5-person board that handles the operations and executive decisions of a law firm. At one point, his law firm was the co-counsel for the Michael Jackson estate. handling massive transactions. And the guy who was the one of the co-counsel for the Michael Jackson estate, reported to the guy I'm talking about. And I was invited to meet with him and talk with him. And we really just connected and had a terrific conversation. And generally, when I'm in rooms like that, I don't talk much. I just listen. I'm here to listen. I'm just here to soak it all in and learn, right? Take notes and see how I can apply that to my situation. And as we were talking, and he was sharing about his life and sharing about his perspective on business, granted in the legal space, we turned to him, and I don't want to say this in a way that paints a bad picture, but he yelled at his assistant, his executive assistant, who was outside in the other, clearly in another area. And he said, "Is that check ready?" As he yelled, and the assistant responded back. And he said, "Excuse me." And he said my name. He said, "Excuse me, we got to get a check to the governor." And I was like, "Oh, please do tell." I don't mind me. I'm just sitting here watching how you do business around here. But after we talked and he was explaining how the governor was coming over his house, I was surprised. I said, "Wow, you're not going to the governor's house or the governor's mansion. The governor is bringing his folks to your house." I said, "I guess I am in the right room." And as we were talking, he shared with me, and this is tied to failure, how he said, with all of what people see and what they come and when, this particular law firm has 30 offices around the world. But anyone who knows anything about lawyers, they really have to build their own book of business, including senior partners and things of that nature. They're very entrepreneurial in that perspective. And as successful as he lives in a beautiful home, beautiful family. He travels the world most of the time. When I'm talking to him, I ask him what city is he in, what country is he in. But as we were talking in his office, he said, what most folks don't know is every day I'm afraid that I'm going to lose it all. And again, I just sat there silent. I wanted to hear more because from my perspective looking in, I said, "You've got everything. You've worked hard and you've accomplished everything." He said, "It can all go away. That's how I stay motivated. I never think that this is how it will always be." He said, "One bad court case, one bad court ruling could jeopardize a lot for the firm and for my standing in it." And as we talked, he really shared with me, frankly, and that's why I said I want to protect his privacy, his insecurities. Even though he, quote, had risen to one of the top five folks who runs a law firm with, I think now, 1,000 or so attorneys around the country, representing some of the biggest names you would probably know if I were to, quote, name drop them. He still was paranoid of failure, still paranoid of one bad court ruling from one of our biggest clients, and we would cut our billings in half and have to consider letting go of staff. Even though that might not be as dramatic as he put it, he kept that pressure on him to always push for more. This,
Yeah, it's an interesting story there, King. I'll tell you that it was Andy Grove said, "Only the paranoid survive," didn't they? And I'd love to come back to you in a minute to hear some more about that. But is that true though, Colin? Is it only the paranoid survive? And as entrepreneurs, we need to have that sort of paranoid mindset to avoid failure and things like that. Is that true?
Yes.
Yeah, I think so.
Asked and answered, Michael.
Asked and answered.
Sometimes, look, only the paranoid survive. I've lived by that my whole life. Every company we have, look, if you build something and if one day it all gets taken away from you, like it did today in a way, we spent Michelle, Jeff, myself, and Jack's starting to join us here now too, which is awesome. But we spent a year now working on Startup Club, and it was hacked today, and we were removed as admins, and the logo was changed, and all the rooms were hacked. And we reached out. Thank goodness we had a relationship with Rohan and Paul Davison, and we were able to communicate with them and get the rooms some of the stuff restored. Most of our clubs have been restored, but Startup Club has not. And were we paranoid enough that we could have a security breach? Now we know where it came from, and I won't mention right now, on obviously for good reason, but we know where the breach came from, and the question becomes: were we paranoid enough? Look, paranoia reduces potential failure down the road, and we're going to do a better job on security when it comes to Startup Club and Talk Club, and I know a lot of other clubs, Community Club, OG Club. There were a number of the largest clubs were hacked today, and we're gonna improve that. So I don't know if that answers your question, Michael.
Yeah, but it's only the paranoid survive. I actually agree with you. I have that mentality as well. Like we had our best week ever in one of my businesses this past week. Like it's just going gangbusters. But it's funny, we have a great sort of party as such with the team and the sort of celebration and all that sort of stuff. But inside, I'm saying, but what if? It's that what if that drives me. And it's the what if that King was talking about. It was almost, what if this happens? What if that happens? And asking all those sort of questions. What if you suddenly, a major client leaves or something? All these sort of things going through my mind constantly because I'm paranoid. So just coming back to yourself, King, with your story, and I know, and I interrupted it along that journey. I'm happy. It'd be great to hear anything more you need to add on the topic of dealing with failure and how this particular gentleman deals with failure, and he deals with the potential of failure by having that paranoid mindset. So over to you, King.
Certainly. And so when it comes to a person who is someone like him, right? Entrepreneur, and a business executive, you have to look around the corner. You oftentimes your staff, your team, they're so focused on the moment, that win for the moment. We opened the store on time. We hit our goal for the month. We hit the taking care of this particular customer that's an important customer today. But as that business executive, you got to look around the corner 2, 3 weeks ahead, 2, 3 months ahead, 2 or 3 years ahead to plan for the what ifs. Because it's your job, unfortunately, or I actually look at it as fortunately, the responsibility lies on you to maintain that business. So tying it back to him and his how he handles it, he said, but I wouldn't change it for anything because frankly, look at me now. And I'll just give this little description of this particular gentleman. He is an African American gentleman who made it in a law firm, a white shoe type of law firm, all of the big names, I'm sure those who are in the legal space, where you don't see many at his level making it to where he's at. And he said, and so I'm always mindful of the fact that I have a special responsibility. And this is his perspective for those who I am helping shape the pathway for others, for women. So, for instance, he's been pushing in the firm now to create executive positions and senior partnerships for women. Doing these types of things, he has tackled this challenge of failure because, yes, there's actually some partners under him who've had better success in the courtroom. Yet he somehow was still able to climb the ladder, win the clientele that brings in the revenue to the firm, and thus, even though his record is not perfect in the courtroom, and granted, some of that is just based on what your clientele brings as far as a case, he was still able to handle all of these balancing act of, I've still got to focus on what the long-term objective is, while also being aware every day in a courtroom, the jury may rule against you. The judge may rule against you. Your client may want to settle when you think they shouldn't settle. All of these variables is something that I think entrepreneurs deal with on a daily basis, dealing with sales, dealing with marketing, dealing with HR issues, dealing with legal matters, dealing with governmental regulations, dealing with customer issues. All of these, if you will, oranges you have to juggle or what have you, while also maintaining your sanity. And I think that in his case, what I learned from him was even though he has risen to incredible levels in corporate America, invited to the White House, this, that, the third, blah, 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 he still stays paranoid. And he has had challenges, right? As you can, I'm sure, imagine any attorney at that level has. Yet he still has prevailed. And I think when you deal with the topic of failure, what I learned from him was is even though there's opportunities for regular failure, because again, his clients could be sued at any time, dealing with, for instance, he sometimes has to deal with labor issues, right? Workers' compensations issues, where you've got to settle with an employee who had an accident at one of the plants, or whatever the company's issues are that his clients or his firm has to deal with. They still tackle this matter of how do we handle this, if you will, setback for our client, this setback for our customer, while still making the best of it? That's what I learned from him. Taking a grain of salt of, even though we're going to have challenges, they're going to be setbacks. And I know sometimes entrepreneurs don't only want to hear the pie in the sky, everything will be okay. Yes, it will, but you have to understand everything will be okay because you made it through the setbacks, not because there are no setbacks.
How true you're saying. Yeah, like you made it through those setbacks. One of the things that really struck me from what you were just sharing then, King, was the myriad of things that entrepreneurs have to actually deal with. There's just so many things. And I sometimes wonder whether the precursor to failure is actually doing way too much and expecting way too much of yourself. And Michelle, I'm going to come to you to share on this and also other aspects of what King has really sort of highlighted there in a second. But just there's, I know with myself, when I'm finding my time is so fragmented that I'm chopping from one thing to another and I'm not getting things done or completed. I'm just chopping across so many different issues and everything like that. I know I'm on a wrong path and I've actually got to go along and cull the list of things I'm doing very quickly. If I don't do that, then that's going to be really bad. The other thing I've learned from the Complete Entrepreneur Room is the concept. I learned this from Colin, is always assign responsibilities, not tasks. Assign responsibility. Not that's really helped me out. But anyway, Michelle, just coming back to you, do you have some thoughts to share on what King was talking about, or just on this topic in general?
Wow, there's so much to say about this topic. I guess one thing that I think about is I think there's degrees. We were talking about paranoia, and that kind of stuck in my head because it's like your human brain just wants to go down that drain, and it can be such a trap, and it can be so detrimental. But I think we have to use that paranoia to our advantage. So my point I'm trying to get to here is I think there's degrees of paranoia. I actually think it's being smart and looking forward so that you can make plans, so that you can have tactical moves. And I think people shouldn't think of it as failure. They should actually think that things are going to happen, and not to be everything's panacea, right? Which they were. Sometimes it does, but it's really being smart and thinking about what are all the scenarios. It's almost a game, Michael. It really is a game. And what can we do if X happens? What can we do if Y happens? I think that puts us in a different mind frame rather than, oh my God, and retreating. And that's a very dangerous position to be in. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much for that, Michelle. Really appreciate what you just shared there. Yeah, it's so true. There's some dangerous mindsets. I'm going to come to Jack in a second to get his views on this topic, but it's a dangerous game that we play. You can end up in a mental black hole if you're too paranoid. And it's almost that old adage where you need to smell the roses on the journey of life. Yeah, and don't focus on the fact of every single rose bush has thorns and just look at the thorns. Realize there's actually a rose on it and celebrate some wins. Celebrate the joy of what it means to be so creative as an entrepreneur. There's nothing like it. I find myself, I just come on fire on the inside. When something that didn't exist, suddenly then, and more than that, something that didn't exist, it now exists. And more than that, someone then put money down to buy that thing that didn't exist before. And that is the most incredible thing, an incredible experience in my life. I just love doing that. It's such a joy. But Jack, what have you got to share on the topic on dealing with failure? Love to hear from you, Jack.
Oh, Michael, thank you so much. And I love what you said there about roses and thorns. They say some people complain because roses have thorns. I'm just glad thorns have roses. And I think with failure, we're talking about failure today. And I want to say thanks for you guys for putting this conversation on, because failure is something that a lot of people try to shy away from. But what I've found in my life and my journey is that failure is necessary. Failure is basically data. It's just the wrong data. And what you want to do is you want to embrace failure. You want to not shy away from it. In fact, Edison, he failed many times before he was able to ultimately turn the lights on for everybody. And so you're going to fail. The question is, are you going to stop? Are you going to quit? Are you going to give up on your dream? Are you going to give up on building your business, creating that life that you want to create, whatever that is for you? And what I know is I know that we're all going to fail. And what we have to do is we have to learn from our failures. We have to grow from our failures. I remember a time in my life, and I have worked on all types of different jobs along my journey and transitioning to entrepreneurship. And I'll never forget, I had a boss one time. I used to work at like cell towers. I used to build like Verizon networks many years ago. And one day I go to pull out of the office. It was Greensboro, North Carolina. I go to pull out of the office and had a big trailer hooked up to a bucket truck. I was going to go out there. I was going to build these fiber optic networks, and took the turn a little bit too hard to the left. And the trailer got caught on the fence. Ended up ripping the whole fence down. And it was really embarrassing, as you can imagine. Ripped the whole fence down. And I must have been probably 19 at the time. And my boss come out there at the time, and let's just say he wasn't necessarily he's probably a big reason I decided to go into entrepreneurship. Let me put it that way. But he had some advice for me that day, and it really always stuck with me. Always stuck with me. He said, he said, mistakes are proof you're trying. He said, but if you make the same mistake twice, that means you didn't learn from the first failure. And that message really stuck with me. And I've made a lot of failures in my life to get where I am today. And you're going to fail. The question is, do you learn from your failures? Do you grow from your failures? Do you take that data that you got and do you begin again? Are you willing to try one more time? And it's really just about what I believe as well, is it's about realizing that sometimes what we got to realize is it just takes one yes, it takes one conversation to have a breakthrough in our business, in our life. And I know, again, in my journey, I can only teach you what I've learned in my journey. And I also learned that in my journey. I learned that failure is necessary. It's a necessary part of you growing. But the key is also to keep a positive attitude as you fail. One day I get on an elevator, and this is a time again. I was probably 22 years old, out there living in Los Angeles in the Wild West, and going for it, going for my dreams. And everybody back home, I'm from North Carolina. Everybody back home said, "Oh, he'll never make it. He'll never make it." And I said, "I got a dream. I'm gonna go do it." And I get out there to LA, and I go to try to build a dream and build a business, and it's tough. And I failed miserably. Next thing, I'm behind on my car note. Next thing you know, they repoing my car. Next thing you know, my parents are looking at me like, "Hey, are you okay? You want to move back home? Like, I don't think you're failing a lot out there, son. Are you okay?" And I let them know, "Hey, listen, it's a part of the journey." And one day I get in an elevator, right after my car got repoed, about 2 weeks after my car got repoed. At the time I'm selling Toyotas, Westminster, California, Elmore Toyota. I'm selling Toyotas, and I'm working really hard. I'm the first one there, the last one to leave, working hard, trying to create my own luck, trying to get that breakthrough. And it just seemed like I was failing no matter which way I turned. Everywhere, every direction I turned, I was failing. And one day I get in an elevator, and see, your life can change in a moment. Your life can change. One connection, everything can change. And I went in the elevator, and there was a guy in there. He was dressed suit and tie, but I could tell his tie was a Gucci tie. I could tell he had a Ferragamo belt. I could tell he had some money. I said, "Sir, what do you do?" That's also another thing. You want to deal with failure? Ask for help. A lot of us are today in entrepreneurship, we're afraid to ask for help. I met this guy. He was a finance manager at Porsche, and his name was Lamont Davis. God bless Lamont Davis. I pray everybody in this room ever finds a Lamont Davis in their life. And Lamont, he looked at me and he said, "What do you do?" I said, "Oh, I sell Toyotas. I would love to work at Porsche though." And I told him my dream. I said, "Listen, I moved out here. I've been going through it, and I'm looking to make a name for myself. Ask for help." I got the interview. He said, "Now listen, it's up to you to sell yourself." And I went in there, and guess what? I'll be daggone if I didn't get the job. And not only that, I actually became the youngest brand ambassador in all of North America selling Porsches. And I don't tell anybody that to impress you, but I tell it to impress upon you that your life can change in a moment. You can go from, in my case, I went in an 8 month period of time. I went from living in my mother's basement in North Carolina to experiencing failures along the way, lots of failures along the way. For 8 months, I had every opportunity to give up and quit and go back home. But I kept believing in myself. I kept believing in the fact that I had this vision for my life of something more. And maybe that resonates with somebody in this room. And one of my mentors, Grant Cardone, he said, "Life will pay you any price you have the courage to ask of it." You have to have courage though, because life is going to do you some blows. It's going to do you some things that you don't see coming. And it's really about how do you respond. The power belongs to the person that realizes failure is an indication, number one, that you're trying. So pat yourself on the back, because most people don't even do that. And so if you'll try, you'll fail. But what you'll find is you'll be like me, and you'll get a little success if you don't quit, if you don't give up. And you'll learn every step of my journey. I'll tell you what, I've made a lot of failures, but I've learned every step of the way. And that's how every failure has led me to what's next. I heard somebody say the word, I believe it was King said the word earlier. He said setback. And I don't like that word, King. I'll be honest with you. I call them setups, because and it's funny, we're in the startup, because every setback that I ever had was actually a setup to something much, much better. And so, what I always tell myself when I run into those quote unquote setbacks, I always tell myself that I'm protected and I'm promoted, and that something better is on the way. And so, I hope that helps somebody out there. And this is an amazing room. You guys are amazing. Let's go.
Wow, Jack, what a great story. What a really wonderful story. It really is. And you raised so many issues in that story with entrepreneurship. And I sometimes think the difference between an entrepreneur and someone who is an entrepreneurs and non-entrepreneurs, they all measure up risks. They always measure up, what's the risk of failure? But an entrepreneur says, I'm going to go anyway. Yeah, I'm going to go and pursue it anyway, because they know 100% of the time that if you don't try, you will fail. 100% of the time. But you know what? An entrepreneur says, you know what? This business may only have a chance of working 20% of the time, maybe successful 20% chance, but I'm going to have a go at it. And I'm going to pursue it. And let's see what I can do to make it increase that to 30 to 40 to 50 to ultimately to 100%. Yeah, it's a great inspirational story. And I think you said something else there, Jack, which was ask for help. And I love the fact there's people in the room right now in the Complete Entrepreneur, and they're here because they want to go along and get some wisdom from some people who've been there and done that. They want to hear the stories. And it's all the people, all of you in this room right now is the reason why we do what we do. It's because our desire is to go along and help you along your journey. You're the hero of your journey. We may be able to be some tools and be a guide along the way at the Complete Entrepreneur. Anyway, great, Jack. Thank you very much for that.
Just so you know, Michael, I really wanted you two to meet. Jack is now doing the show Manifest Your Destiny on Startup Club. You can see this guy's a celebrity and good things happen, and he's got a lot of great wisdom. And I'm gonna ask a question of Jack and King and maybe David as well. So when we have the failure in our business, or maybe a deal, we lost a deal, we lost that sales, we lost the contract. I don't know what it is, but we had that failure. Do we just sort of dust ourselves off and get back up and go at it and forget about that? Or do we try to internalize why we failed? I'm curious how each of you would answer that question.
Oh, I would definitely think that it's definitely about how do you pivot, how do you learn, how do you grow, what's your next move. I love Patrick Brett David, which is a lot of people out there know him, and one of the things that he always says is your next 5 moves. That's one of the books that he wrote. And your next 5 moves, that they determine really where you're going to go. And we're all going to get knocked down, and it's really about the learning from the data, taking the data, switching, right, growing, and saying, all right, what happened? Going to the whiteboard, have a whiteboard moment, and lay it all out there and be honest with yourself. I think the key is to be honest with yourself. That's the key, is really to look at it from almost like a 30,000 point of view, where you're almost take yourself out of it, look at the situation. Because I think sometimes, especially being an entrepreneur, we can, because we're so in the day-to-day invested, we can take it personal when things arrive, and you should take it personal. I'm not saying don't take it personal, you should take it personal, but you also should take a step outside, look at your whole situation, look at what's going on. And really, I believe is you're only as good as your weakest. Where are the weakest, where are you not strong at, where are you not proficient at? And that probably the things that you fear the most hold the treasures that you seek. So what you need to do is you need to not run from those things that scare you, but actually to learn, grow, keep expanding, and keep looking at it again. Like I say, if you don't, I always believe if you don't see what you want. I love what the quote that they say the people that really get on in this world, they look around, and if they don't see what they want, they create it. You're going to have some moments where things aren't going to go your way. The key is, what do you do? How do you look at it? What's the story? It's all about really self-belief. Are you willing to look at things from a new perspective? Sometimes, especially in being an entrepreneur, I always think about BlackBerry, right? BlackBerry, they were like, man, I'm going to have my things my way. I want the keypad. And everybody around the world, we want smartphones. And BlackBerry was like, no, we want keypads. We want keypads. And guess what? BlackBerry, they're gone. They're out of here. And so you got to take that data and you got to listen. A lot of times the things that your customers, or the feedback that you're getting, most of the time what I've found is that data, they're actually telling you what they want. But what you've got to do is you've got to take yourself out of the picture, look at it, and really address the situation from there. That's what I would say.
Yeah, I know, Jack. I love my BlackBerry. Let me say that. One, two. You talk about the weakest link. I think that as entrepreneurs, as startups, we need to surround ourselves with a solid foundation. We need friends who understand that when we fail, it's okay, that we don't have to be embarrassed by our fail. We need a spouse and a family that understands it's okay. We do not have to be embarrassed by our failure, because that's what it's all about, really, if you think about it. Yeah, we might have lost money, but we're afraid of being embarrassed. We're afraid that our idea didn't work. We're afraid that we screwed up. And you talk about the weakest link, creating a foundation around us, that is key.
Yeah, how true, Colin. Like, I think that the key is that here is defining what is failure as well. And Jack, you mentioned this a number of times. Is the whole issue around learning and learning from the data and so forth. I think the other thing is this: is are you prepared to destroy your own success for greater success? Because I've seen this in many businesses where you entrepreneurs, they get a successful product and they just keep on repeating that successful product until when? Until it fails. So you can have someone else impose failure on you, and that someone else can be a competitor or something like that. With which case you're going to experience failure because they've innovated. Or you can decide, you know what, I'm going to cannibalize my own success in order to go along and generate my next sort of iteration of being successful. And that's actually a really dangerous and scary proposition. I know one of my businesses right now, we've taken a completely different approach to working with. And the thing we've ended up becoming is very paranoid about. It's not about our business. It's about them, the heroes. And this whole sort of approach means we potentially may be cannibalizing what we do in our business. And it's a big challenge to take those sort of steps forward. So we're releasing a new service in a couple of weeks' time. And it's potentially going to cannibalize what we have. But we believe, and this is an interesting thing for an entrepreneur, we believe the future is better, because if we create the future rather than let someone else impose a negative future on us, then it's going to be a better outcome. But I just want to jump down to David. David's been very patient there. And it's great having you on the Complete Entrepreneur, David, and love to hear from you, your thoughts on this topic of dealing with failure. Welcome to the stage, David.
Thank you, Michael. Good to see everyone's faces and hear your voices. I just actually, I think a week or two ago, came out of a pretty massive failure, but one that I didn't create, but that I was a part of, because a lot of the clients we work with, they're focusing on accelerating their exits, and oftentimes they don't make it. And in other words, they don't make it to where they think they need to be. They don't make the acquisition, they don't make the IPO, their event becomes a liquidity event, something that they weren't expecting. And in their mind, they think of that as a failure. In my mind, I think of that as just a different kind of opportunity, depending upon who's sitting behind which desk. The CEO did quite well, the CMO didn't. But he learned a lot. They both learned a lot. And I think the biggest lesson learned was in the humility of who's really behind the wheel at what time. As this process unfolded, being on the outside and having been on the outside for 28 years with these kinds of companies, I could see that at what point it was time for the CEO to accept failure in his own position and step down and hand the keys to someone else to drive the car. But that's not where his mind was. He was thinking he would just keep it going. He would take a different route. He would bring on different passengers. And it didn't change what kind of car he was in, didn't change the overall feeling or the theme or the direction of the company. And so at the end of the day, most of the people that left the company had thought that they had failed the company. They took it personally. And I told them they had accomplished a lot. Many of them were there 8 months to a year. I was there for 4 years as an outside consultant. And they learned a lot, but unfortunately, at the top, there was this lack of humility and this lack of focus and this drive, which I think was mostly driven by ego, which ultimately took out the entire company. Now, I think a lot of people will have benefited from this experience. Like we talk about failure all the time in startups, right? But only if they're able to put their ego aside, they're able to not think about themselves, and they focus on the service that they provided to others and what they learned when they were serving others, and how they can take that service to another company and to another team. And I've seen so many fantastic technologies just poof go away when these people that have experienced these failures didn't take those lessons, didn't approach this as a service to others, and they were in it for themselves. So I'll say one last thing. Most of the people I talked to after this company went south said this thing. I was hoping this would be my golden goose. I, don't have much retirement, and I don't want to sell my house to live on the cash I get from it. So I just have to go to another startup. Wrong way to think. Wrong way to think. That is not the way we learn from failure. That is when we get stuck on ourselves and stuck on our ego, and they'll just experience the same thing all over again. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for that, David. A lot of wisdom in what you just shared then in that story. And it can be very challenging. You've been listening to The Complete Entrepreneur, and we've been tackling the issue of dealing with failure. And I feel like we've just scratched the surface of this. Colin, I think we should, and Jeff, and I think we should actually tackle dealing with failure 2 next week. Because there's so much on this topic. What's your thoughts on that, Jeff?
Yeah, I have 10 things that we could talk about. So many great points were raised. And plus, when you initially launched the room for an entrepreneur, the complete entrepreneur dealing with failure, I think most people thought about it from business failure's perspective, which is certainly part of the entrepreneurial journey. But then there's also a whole different angle that we can approach when we take this up again next week, if you want, which is
Yeah.
personal failure as an entrepreneur. So as someone who in the earlier parts of my career, put too much emphasis on company first to the detriment of my family, which eventually led to divorce and stress on my children, et cetera, et cetera. I'd look at that as even some of my businesses may have succeeded and some also failed. I felt that when I look back at it now, older and wiser, personally, I failed my family. I failed some of my other obligations because I put the business first to too much of a degree. So that's a whole different angle on the complete entrepreneur dealing with failure that we haven't even scratched the surface of.
How true, Jeff. And Colin, do you want to just say something? I think we
I
should
would.
do this next week, Colin.
I
Again.
agree. I agree. I agree. I don't think we touched upon some of the negative impacts of failure, like substance abuse. I'm not. It's hard for me to say this, but we often see when a stock market crashes, people jumping out of buildings. There is a psychological, emotional component to failure that I don't think we really have gotten deep enough into and talked about. I do applaud this room because this room failed from the very beginning in that since we were hacked and for whatever reason we were not able to get the audience, but yet we all came together as a community and created a great room. And I know it's gonna, as we go into the recordings on startup.club and obviously a 24-hour radio station, which we want to launch down the road too. This is the kind of content that every startup should listen to. I think too often we spend too much time on how to get rich quick and not enough time on our emotional states. And Michael, you're killing it with the complete.
Thank you very much for that, Colin. I really do appreciate that because I think it's one of the challenges as entrepreneurs we all experience is it's not just the challenges of a business, it's the challenges of our life. The challenges of who we are. And tackling this a little bit deeper, I think, next week. I think you're right. We need to get deeper into this topic of dealing with failure. How do you deal with failure? Like serious failures in life. And that as an entrepreneur, it's so easy to skim across the surface and actually never learn from those failures. And I'm looking forward to next week. So we're going to
And we
alter
got
the
to
schedule
invite
for the
Michael. We have to invite King, Jack, David, and by the way,
yeah,
Noelle in the audience, right? I know you
yeah,
must have had some failures, Noelle. You're the
yeah.
queen of e-commerce, so we got to invite you all back next week, and let's really hit it out with that show next week.
Yeah, I agree. I'd love to have you all back. I'll tell you what, for next week, because I think that this is a topic which is, its time has come to discuss, to be quite blunt with you. The time has come to discuss. And each one of you in the audience right now will have a friend that's gone through some sort of failure, or a loved one gone through some sort of failure, or you're going through failure. Bring them into the room, invite them in, because we're going to be really unpacking this. I really want to pursue this issue because it's at the heart of so much heartache. And it's something that we need to go along and really open up and unpack all the issues and let it all hang out there in a safe sort of space like this. So if you've been in the audience, you're saying, you know what, some of the people on the stage or have really said some great things, then don't forget, go ahead and follow us. Just click on the profile, click on follow, and so you can learn from that particular person that you really want to hear from a bit more and reach out to them. I know each one of us would love to be able to engage with you. So next week, we're going to be opening up this a lot further on The Complete Entrepreneur. It's at 5 p.m. Eastern Time, and we're going to have a great time doing so. I think we're going to have a very heartfelt time as well. I'd like to thank all of my co-moderators. I know Michelle had to leave early for another event, but also Jeff and Colin, it's wonderful having your wisdom and your insight upon The Complete Entrepreneur. For those of you who came to the stage, King, Jack, David, fabulous having your thoughts on this topic as well. It's been great having you up here. Really do appreciate your thoughts as well. And most in particularly, you and the audience. You're the reason why we do this. We don't get paid buckets of money and all that sort of stuff. In fact, I don't get paid anything. I do it because I want to go along and help other entrepreneurs. And it's fabulous having you here with us. Thank you very much for your time. And I look forward to seeing you next week on The Complete Entrepreneur at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. God bless you.
Thank you.